Good morning. I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Friday, September 5th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, how RFK Jr. was grilled during a Senate hearing, plus what Medicaid cuts mean for parts of Appalachia, and we discuss the First Amendment and South Park satirizing of President Trump. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was at the heart of an explosive hearing yesterday. Among the eyebrow-raising moments, he refused to acknowledge more than 1 million Americans died from coronavirus and was reluctant to give COVID-19 vaccines credit in saving lives. Kennedy and his comments before the Senate Finance Committee had a particularly heated exchange with Democratic Senator Mark Warner.
Would you accept the fact that 1 million Americans died from COVID?
I don't know how many died.
You're the Secretary of Health and Human Services. You don't have any idea how many Americans died from COVID?
I don't think anybody knows that because there was so much data chaos coming out of the CDC, and there was so many perverse incentives. These are models.
You don't know the answer of how many Americans died from COVID. This is the Secretary of Health and Human Services.
According to the most recent data publicized by the CDC, more than 1.2 million Americans had died from COVID as of August 23rd. Numerous independent studies have found COVID vaccinations saved millions of lives in the U.S. and millions more around the world. Be sure to tune into The Excerpt on Sunday when my colleague Dana Taylor will be joined by USA Today White House correspondent Swapna Venugopal Ramaswamy for more on this topic. Medicaid once boosted parts of the Appalachian U.S. So what do recent cuts mean for the region? I spoke with USA Today national correspondent Chris Kenning for more on what he learned in a remote part of Kentucky. Chris, thank you so much for joining me. Another great piece from you.
Thank you so much.
Well, it's clear Medicaid has boosted parts of Appalachia in a number of ways, Chris. How so, and how does that 2014 expansion factor in? I know you focus on this as well in the piece.
After the Affordable Care Act passed, states could decide to expand Medicaid from traditional populations to what they call the working poor, adults that are under 138% of the poverty line. And in the counties that make up Appalachian Eastern Kentucky, these are places that have a lot of challenges. They have really disproportionately high rates of chronic disease and addiction and economic hardship. And so when the state did that, they saw statewide the uninsurance rate fell from like 14% to 5% roughly between when they did that and 2023. And you just saw a lot more people get access to care, which meant medical visits increased. People were taking care of chronic conditions, hospital budgets eased because they had fewer uninsured patients, and it helped local economies. And it also really boosted drug treatment in an area that badly needed it. And so today, nearly half the population in these counties are able to see a doctor or take medicine because of that program. So it had a very big impact.
Chris, earlier this summer, we saw President Trump's big, beautiful bill, as it was called by many. It really included a lot of cuts from Medicaid. What specifically did we see earlier this summer? And I guess just what do these Trump moves mean practically for this region?
The cuts to Medicaid come primarily from provisions in the law that include an 80-hour-a-month work requirement that's kind of expected to lead people to not stay in the program. That and a bunch of other provisions affecting different things are projected to leave 10 million people nationally to be uninsured within a decade. So you have these work requirements kicking in after the 2026 midterms, and they have to be met for a month ahead of enrollment, and the state must perform eligibility checks more often. So this is all kind of a big change from a few years ago when the Biden administration allowed people to remain on Medicaid during the pandemic. And Republicans say that this is targeting waste, fraud, and abuse, and that House Speaker Mike Johnson said that this is targeting 29-year-old males sitting on couches playing video games, and that it will preserve the program for those who really need it. Many recipients already work or are in situations that may exempt them, like caring for sick relatives. But critics of these changes say it just throws up bureaucratic barriers that trip people up and will leave people off the rolls who should be on it, who actually deserve to be on it. So because Eastern Kentucky, Appalachian Kentucky got such a big boost from the Medicaid expansion, people there are worried that it's going to take an outsized hit. There's the threats to people struggling with the eligibility requirements. But there are also, as part of the bill, changes to provider taxes that Kentucky uses to help fund hospitals and clinics who rely on Medicaid. And so it helps them get a higher reimbursement rate so they can actually cover the costs. And that's going to take a big hit in Kentucky as well. So that's one reason that Kentucky's Democratic governor, Andy Beshear, has said he estimates cuts would leave roughly 200,000 people uninsured in the state in that time frame. And also it threatens 35 rural hospitals that would be at risk of possible closure.
You mentioned Andy Beshear a moment ago. I mean, how is all this playing out politically, either within Kentucky or beyond, Chris?
Democrats are not very popular in this former coal mining area that was, used to be Union blue and has since turned deep red. A lot of support for Trump in the last couple of elections. But Democrats are kind of hoping that the cuts to social safety net programs like this may provide a new political foothold. We've seen polling that majorities of Republicans, Democrats, and independents say that Medicaid is important to their communities. But whether voters levy a political price is not certain at all, because there was a University of Michigan study that looked at who voters held responsible for rural hospital closures. And it found that in states where Republicans chose not to expand Medicaid and where they saw more hospital closures, voters wound up blaming Democrats and the Affordable Care Act. And so there's a lot of research, this professor said, that shows that people kind of struggle to assign responsibility in these complex issues. So for now, that's up in the air, but many are just kind of waiting and holding their breath and waiting to see how badly the impact hits.
All right. Chris Kenning is a national correspondent with USA Today. Another outstanding piece from you, Chris. Thanks for hopping on.
Thank you for having me.
The animated comedy South Park keeps tying President Donald Trump to Satan, and it's a good time to get a refresher on satire and the First Amendment. I spoke with USA Today First Amendment reporting fellow Brianna Frank for more. Brianna, always a treat having you back on. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for making the time. So, South Park has really been upping the ante here. How have they been satirizing Donald Trump?
Yeah, so the Trump administration has been at the center of South Park storylines throughout this season. Every episode has linked President Trump to Satan. They've also shown a deep fake video of Trump taking his clothes off in the desert. And they've also depicted other members of his administration, including Vice President J.D. Vance.
Well, you cover the First Amendment. What does it say about content like this?
Political satire is protected by the First Amendment right to free speech. I talked to a few experts who told me that political satire, like South Park's, has some of the greatest constitutional protection, though there are still limits to that.
Is there any scenario where Trump could take legal action?
The experts I talked to told me that there's nothing technically stopping President Trump from initiating a lawsuit, but there's a very high bar that public figures like President Trump have to meet in order to win in a defamation or libel lawsuit, for example. And one of the things that they would have to prove is that someone published a statement of fact that is false. And the experts I talked to said South Park could easily argue that they're a parody show, and adding certain details to their sketches that make it more absurd actually give them more protection because it further shows that they're not presenting this as a fact.
All right. Well, this is clearly a heavily satirized president. I mean, has anyone gotten in trouble for satirical speech about Trump?
Yes, the Secret Service opened an investigation into comedian Kathy Griffin in 2017 after she posed with a fake decapitated head that resembled President Trump. She describes the photo as political satire, and she didn't actually end up facing any criminal charges.
All right. And what do we hear from him and his administration about all this?
I reached out to the White House for comment for this story and didn't get a response. But after the season premiere, the White House did issue a statement that said South Park, quote, hasn't been relevant for over 20 years and is hanging on by a thread with uninspired ideas in a desperate attempt for attention.
All right. Strong words. Brianna Frank covers the First Amendment for USA Today. I appreciate you, Brianna.
Thanks, Taylor.
Giorgio Armani, the famed Italian fashion designer, has died. Armani combined the flair of the designer with the acumen of a businessman, running a company that turned over $2.7 billion a year. Raised in northern Italy, he swapped early medical ambitions for a fashion career, launching a label with his name in 1975. His design empire stretched into nearly all facets of modern entertainment and style, including a sometimes understated red carpet approach that graced stars from Julia Roberts to Richard Gere. An avid sports fan, Armani was also behind the uniforms of several soccer teams and crossed his design interest into the hospitality space, opening a line of luxury hotels. Giorgio Armani was 91. The NFL is back. The league kicked things off last night with the defending champion Philadelphia Eagles taking down the rival Dallas Cowboys 24-20. Things roll on tonight with a game between the Kansas City Chiefs and Los Angeles Chargers to be held in Brazil. Then we'll see most teams back in action on Sunday. You can follow along with USA Today Sports. Before we go today, I want to acknowledge someone incredibly special to our audio team at USA Today. That's producer Shannon Ray-Green. Shannon has been with USA Today for some 16 years and was pivotal during the Wild West years of podcast news when we were all still trying to figure out what this medium would turn into. If you've been listening for years, including when we were called 5 Things, Shannon has had a massive hand in what you've heard every morning. We're all excited to see what Shannon does next, but her vision and passion for storytelling will be deeply missed, as will her kindness. Thanks for everything, Shannon. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. We're produced by Shannon Ray-Green and Kelly Monahan, and our executive producer is Laura Beatty. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio. Cody Godwin and Dana Taylor will be in your ears over the next few days on the show. I'll be back in a little over a week with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.